Not everything.
I mean, it would be great to be able to have access. Good evening. We're going to call the March 22nd, 2018 regular assembly meeting to order. If you'd please join me and rise for a non-sectarian invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. If I can find my... Tonight, let us reflect on the wonderful changes as spring returns. The days are longer, warmer, brighter. Spring skiing beckons us. Dogs beg their owners for walks. Better yet, wild, loose runs. Cats venture out, shake their paws, sit in the sun. Children sled down hills, small and tall. Greenhouses warm and beckon. We sigh, we smile, we say thank you. Please join me with the pledge. The flag is right back there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
I'd like to note for the record that Mr. Cooper, Mr. Roberts, and Mr. Gray are all excused. Mr. Wodowski?
He might be 2 minutes late.
Mr. Quist?
Here.
Mr. Tacky?
Here.
Ms. Major? Here. Mr. Lawrence?
Here.
City of Fairbanks Representative Mr. Cleworth?
Here.
And School Board Representative Ms. Lambert?
Here.
And Ms. Dodge?
Here. Thank you very much. And thank you for those that have braved or have joined us leaving that beautiful spring weather outside. So let's see, that takes us to a safety announcement. And in case we have an emergency, we have 3 exits. We have one that is through the doors that you came in. We have another door right over here behind this pillar. You can go out to your left. And we have another door behind this pillar. You go straight out and then to your right. Actually, it would be your left by the time you get there. Mirror images are tough. So that takes us to a request for removal of items from the consent agenda and any other procedural motions. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the consent agenda? I see no one making that indication. Does anyone need to declare a possible conflict of interest for items on the consent agenda? I see no one indicating that they do. So that takes us to citizens' comments, and we have 2 types of citizens' comments at this time. We have comments on items that are not scheduled for public hearing, and this is memorandums, bid awards, unfinished business, items postponed from previous meetings, ordinances or resolutions that are being advanced to public hearing at a different date. And the second set of citizens' comments is for anything that is not on the agenda in any way. I have nobody signed up for citizens' comments A, and again, this is for items on the agenda not scheduled for public hearing. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on items that are on the agenda not scheduled for public hearing at this time? Mr. Prax, do I see you coming forward? And it's come to our attention that all along we should have been asking people to spell their last name as well as give their address. So if you please give us your name and address and spell your last name for the record, we'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Prax.
Mike Prox, 1015 Meadow Road, North Pole, and the last name spelled P as in P Ptarmigan, R-A-X. And it just occurred to me that this ordinance 2017-20-1X is actually on the agenda, apparently under new business. It has to do with allocating some funds for facilities maintenance. And just skimmed through it and noticed that there were some items on there that I'd heard about in those, was it the sandbox meetings, I think, buildings that were going to be replaced anyway. So I know that's not up for tonight, but if somebody would want to address that and think about that, it would be confusing to somebody like me that would see this, that we're going to replace the roof and then tear the building down. I don't know what it is, but just if you could mention that sometime.
Okay. Let's see. There could be just, is that a question for technical information? Or is that something that, I'm sure that at the work session it will be discussed at length, and certainly the following week.
Yeah, well, I guess that's it. Like I just noticed it walking in, so I don't have any idea what I'm talking about.
Okay, understand. We don't have a whole lot more
getting used to that, right? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Lawrence has a question for you, Mr. Prax.
Are you aware, by looking at this proposed ordinance, that that none of the expenditures contemplated are on structures that will also be demolished? There are a couple of buildings that are scheduled to be demolished, and there are no expenditures to improve any of those structures. It's on page 90. So
no, and I'm behind. The last I heard about this, was it the sandbox meetings? I don't recall, over at
Probably.
Pioneer Park. And I left that meeting thinking that the decision of what to do with these buildings had not been made. And I don't know, something must have been decided between now and then. I don't know. But
I would suspect that this is just a proposal for a discussion.
Yeah.
And to budget money. So I don't think it's going to get spent until the Assembly seriously considers it.
Right, but there was the Mary Sy Recreation Center and the Westcott Swimming Pool specifically. There was a proposal to tear, as I recall, tear both of those down and make one aquatic facility or something like that. that was discussed then. That it wasn't by any means decided, but I think as far as the public knows, they would be thinking these two buildings would be torn down, possibly.
I think the mayor has a clarification. I think the Westcott Pool is not.
Discussion you're referencing is to tear down Mary site and Hammy Pool, not Westcott Pool, from the Sandbox Group,
Thank
and
you very
replace it
much.
with an aquatic center.
Yep.
I believe Hammy's in North Pole, is that correct?
Yeah.
Westcott's in North
I mean,
Pole.
Westcott's
is
in North Pole.
In North Pole, there's a difference. So the Hammy Pool, but then also there was some discussion about the Pioneer Park. Well, this is the Pioneer Hall, and I guess the discussion was with the
Probably Civic Center.
Civic Center. All right, very good. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prax. Does anyone else wish to speak on items that are on the agenda but not up for public hearing this evening? Seeing no one coming forward, we're going to close citizens' comments A, and we will move on to citizens' comments B. And these are the comments that are on anything not on the agenda. And I have three people signed up. I have Mr. Ed Malin, is it? Malin, if you please come forward. Mr. Prax, I'll try and say your name properly, finally. And then after that, I have Steve Heckway. Mr. Mullen, if you'll give us your name, address, and spell your last name for us, for the record.
My name is Ed Mallon, M-A-L-E-N, and I currently reside at 309 Wedgwood Drive.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm Ed Mallon. I'm here in my capacity as a tourism senior sales manager with Explore Fairbanks. I'm I already said that. I'm here to give an update on Explore Fairbanks' recent activity within the Japanese market. In April of last year, my Visit Anchorage counterpart and I orchestrated a statewide tourism industry sales mission made up of Fairbanks and Anchorage businesses to Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo, Japan. In the past, the state of Alaska has organized this annual sales mission utilizing their contractors in the host country. However, this was the first time the mission was held without the support of a state-sponsored contractor due to a substantial decline in the state's tourism marketing budget. With no state presence, it is up to us at the DMO level to continue that important presence to maintain Alaska's importance within this core market. By maintaining our presence in Japan, we also maintain the important relationships with our Japanese industry partners. A similar mission will again be conducted this April in the same cities. With the U.S. Commercial Services providing on-the-ground logistics support and partnering with other DMOs and industry partners in attendance, we are able to keep the interest in Alaska strong and facilitate future business with our Japanese counterparts. Each participant from the sales mission is given time to give a presentation of the product and also a chance to have one-on-one conversations with travel representatives while enjoying Alaska seafood lunch provided by our close friends at the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, otherwise known as ASME. In addition to the annual sales mission, I also attend the Japanese Association of Travel Agents, otherwise known as JATA, every September in Tokyo. In recent years, Explore Fairbanks has been the only Alaskan organization to participate. This 4-day event begins with business-to-business meetings and continues into a trade show for the general public. During the 4 days of the event in 2017, a total of 191,577 travel agents, tour operators, media, and general public walked through the doors. We've recently signed up for the 2018 JATA, which as of this year will be known as the Tourism Expo Japan, and anticipate the Japan market to remain low but stable. These efforts focus not only on finding new potential tour operators to send their business to Alaska, but also focus on maintaining the important relationship with Japan Airlines, otherwise known as JAL, to ensure the continuance of direct charter flights between Japan and Fairbanks. The most recent charter schedule, 2017-2018, saw the arrival of 3 charter flights with guests from Japan as opposed to 5 last year. In the winter months, as the main objective is to see the Aurora Borealis, Fairbanks currently enjoys all of the winter charters from JAL. In the summer, the arrival city of each charter will alternate between Fairbanks and Anchorage to facilitate travel between cities with a stop in Denali National Park. Summer 2017 had 2 flights to both Fairbanks and Anchorage for a total of 4 flights with guests. In 2016, Fairbanks received 1 and Anchorage had 2. It is through these efforts that Explore Fairbanks continues to champion Fairbanks as a superior travel destination. Beyond continuing the sport of the direct charter flights, we're also committed to developing and or researching alternate year-round routes for travelers coming from Japan to Fairbanks. That concludes my remarks for tonight. Thank you as always for your support and what you do by reinvesting bed tax dollars into destination marketing.
Wow. Good timing. Okay, Mr. Lawrence. Let's see if there's any questions for you. And please let the record know that Mr. Lajewski has joined us. Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Malin.
Yes.
I might have not caught it, but I know we had 4 charter flights 2 summers ago, 3 last summer, I think. What's scheduled for this coming summer?
This coming summer has not been determined. They are talking about those charter flights. However, I will not have clarification until I go there next month for this travel mission.
And there's no regularly scheduled Japanese airline flights into Fairbanks.
That is correct. It is all charter based.
Is there, aren't likely to have this information, but if you were to compare the number of Japanese tourists and Chinese tourists coming to Fairbanks, do you have any kind of estimate or any kind of comparison?
I would say by and large, from what I've observed from traveling and working in the travel market, China has seemed to be a lot more prevalent in the last couple of years. The charter flights have been diminished a little bit the last couple of years due to a couple things with JAL, and the China market has just been increasing upon increasing. And we're just trying to keep step with, trying to keep track of who's going where. And I'm sure you've noticed they go kind of everywhere in all directions. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
How many people did you say went through the Japanese show?
191,577 over a 4-day period.
Wow. Thank you.
That's foot traffic. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down.
Thank you very much.
And your hard work.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Prox, if you'd like to take the empty seat, and Mr. Heckway, if you'd like to also come up and take the other empty seat. Mr. Prox, your name and address for the record, and please spell your last name for us. I'm getting trained.
This is
We're
good.
all getting trained.
Yeah, good. Mike Prox, last name spelled P as in Pete Ptarmigan, R-A-X, and my address is 1015 Meadow Rue, North Pole. And I wanted to, I guess comment about the situation out at Tanana Lakes with the hunting regulations, and there has been 2 commission meetings scheduled that apparently were postponed because of lack of agenda. And that, just from several people that I've talked to last week, we're just leaving people a decision dangling, and that in itself is problematic. I don't know what, if anything, can be done about that, but that's kind of it's a common problem on commissions. It's hard to get commissioners, and then hard to get people to meetings. I understand that, but something probably should be taken care of there so that there's some sort of definitive decision, so that if it goes the way people don't want it to go, they can start doing something, or if it goes the way they want it to go, they can quit worrying about it. But just letting people dangle isn't a good idea. On a positive note, I was at the Air Quality Commission meeting, I guess just a couple nights ago, and a couple of things. One, the issue was a gentleman was applying for a no other source of heating waiver, no ash waiver, I guess they call that, and he paid a compliment to, is it Zawarki, the guy that does the air quality? Sarnicki, right. And I can't quote him exactly, but more or less he was grateful that he was paying attention to it and trying to help him out. He didn't like the fact that the department was proposing not to grant him the waiver, but he did appreciate the customer service. So that speaks well of him, and I'd like to compliment him on that. And then just in general, listening to the conversation, and I've worked in air quality issues somewhat as part of my job, and those regulations are extremely convoluted and complicated, and even people that know quite a bit about it often can't agree on what the regulations say. So it would be helpful probably to try and go through what the borough is trying to do, at least simplified. This regulation goes down to this one and that one and the other one, and here we are, and we're going back. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, which doesn't seem to make sense. And then try and provide just a little bit of clarity, trying to go through the website. It's just difficult for people who are not intimately familiar with this stuff to figure out what is the official information. And so a little more work on that would probably be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if there are questions for you. Mr. Mayor has a question for you.
Well, I have some answers. You said that the Parks and Rec Commission meetings were canceled for lack of an agenda. They were canceled for lack of a quorum.
Yes.
There was not enough people. We do have one vacancy on the Parks and Rec Commission. We've been advertising for that. I don't think that was really the reason why we didn't have a quorum, but obviously one more person filling a seat would help also. So we are trying to correct that.
And I'm sure you are. And I just remind you. And the reason I use the word agenda, it appeared there was several meetings behind on the agendas, or on the meeting minutes posted on the website, if I found the correct website. I went home, looked to see if there was something updated from the commissioner or whatever, but it seemed like they were behind on getting those posted. Don't know, might check on that.
Any other questions for Mr. Prox? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr. Heckman, did I misread? Please give us your name and address for the record, and please spell your last name for us.
My name is Steve Heckman, Heckman, and I reside at 2560 Ellen Adale Road.
Thank you.
I have just a brief statement to read in an invitation, actually. I was asked to come here on behalf of the Pioneer Park, Pioneer Air Museum. I'm a board member. And Pioneer Air Museum, as most of you know, is a small aviation museum located in the Gold Dome at Pioneer Park. The museum's mission is to collect, protect, and preserve objects that reflect the rich history of aviation in the interior and the Arctic, private, commercial, and military. The museum also has an aviation display at Fairbanks International Airport, and museum members have donated their time and effort to such projects as Ben Isleson's Jenny at the airport, and the current reconstruction of a Swallow biplane used in the interior that was recently recovered from outside the state. Although modest in size, the Pioneer Air Museum is an economic driver within the community. It employs local people and purchases local goods and services from within the community and region. The borough has maintained the building by providing utility services. The museum is self-sustaining in all other aspects, such as acquisition, payroll, and local purchase to maintain operations. During its summer months of full-time operation, it averages 12,000 visitors a year, including visits from local school children. Many of the visitors include tourists, and in that sense, it provides an attraction to Fairbanks tourism, the Fairbanks tourism industry. When times are challenging, museums are needed more than ever. They provide free and low-cost programming to members of the public of all ages. They provide opportunities to take in culture and beauty. They are places to learn, explore, and grow. The value of these services to the public cannot be measured in dollars, but rather in the value that they add to the lives of those who visit. The Air Museum matters. And if you have not been to the Air Museum or lately, or have not been there at all, you should come and see us. And we would open up to one or all. It's an open invitation to come and see what's there. You'd be amazed and surprised. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Heckman. Let's see if there are questions for you. Yes, Mr. Lawrence has a question.
What are the hours when the museum is open?
Currently, it's closed, although I understand today Mr. Haglund, the curator, had two groups of school children in there. They opened it up for that. I think we open up on May 15th and go operate through May 15th through the September 15th. And we extended our hours last summer. We open at 10 a.m. and close at around 6 p.m., I believe. And we've got staff there the whole time and that are on payroll.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Heckman? Seeing none, thank you for your invitation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for your service. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to close public hearings, or citizens comment B, and I believe we're going to look for a motion. Let's see. That takes us to approval of the agenda and consent agenda. Approval of the consent agenda passes all routine items indicated by an asterisk on the agenda. Consent agenda items are not considered separately unless an assembly member so requests. In the event of such a request, the item is returned to the general agenda. Does anyone need now to declare a possible conflict of interest for items on the consent agenda? I see no one indicating that they do. Are there any other items to be removed from the consent agenda before it's read? See no one indicating that that is so. So, Clerk, would you please read the consent agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Approval of the minutes, regular Assembly meeting minutes of March 8th, 2018. Communications to the Assembly. Memorandum from Nancy Ashford Bingham, Borough Clerk, recommending the appointment of Canvas Board members for the March 27, 2018 service area elections. Memorandum from Mayor Castle recommending the appointment of Wyatt Hurlbut to the Sustainability Commission. Memorandum from Catherine Dodge, Presiding Officer, Communication for consent regarding updated Borough Clerk job description. Consideration of the calendar new business resolutions. Resolution number 2018-14, a resolution approving the donation of the surplus property paratransit vehicles in excess of $1,000 to the municipality of Anchorage in exchange for 2 transit buses. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Resolution number 2018-15, a resolution adopting the substance abuse testing of safety-sensitive employees policy. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Consideration of calendar new business ordinances to be introduced in advance to public hearing. Ordinance number 2017-21W, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2017-18 budget by appropriating $4,800 in federal pass-through grant funding to the Special Revenue Fund to send 3 borough employees to managing floodplain development through the National Flood Insurance Program. Course in Anchorage, Alaska. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Refer to the Finance Committee on April 5th, 2018. Advance to April 12th, 2018 for public hearing. Ordinance number 2017-21X, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2018 budget by reallocating $292,807 and by appropriating $2,465,000 from the Facilities Maintenance Reserve to the Capital Project Funds for various borough-wide facility projects. Sponsor Mayor Castle. Refer to the Finance Committee on April 5th, 2018 and advance to April 12th, 2018 for public hearing. And that concludes your consent agenda.
Thank you. I look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. So it's been moved by Mr. Tacky and seconded by Ms. Major. Is there any objection to approving the consent agenda as read? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. And that takes us to messages from the Borough Mayor. Mr. Mayor, have your messages.
Well, thank you. I'm going to avoid the 4-letter word budget tonight because we're going to have plenty of that in the near future. And so I had something much more positive. You know, we host a lot of different events and conferences in our community, and I always get to welcome folks and tell them how we have good hospitality. But mayors always say that sort of stuff. But we recently had a hockey tournament back in February, and I got a card from one of the participants' moms who was here from Juneau. And it says, earlier this year in February, my daughter was part of the hockey 8 and under tournament held at the Big Dipper. I just wanted to let you know that from the start to the very end, it was a great first visit to your city. From the tournament organizers to the local businesses who were very welcoming to the visitors from Juneau, thank you. Thank you very much. You have wonderful people in your city. We knew that, and it's nice that other folks recognize that too. Certainly helps Explore Fairbanks too when we're welcoming. It's nice to be here. Don't have any other messages tonight.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, that takes us to reports of special and standing committees. Ms. Major, why don't I start with you? Do you have any reports?
So I had the opportunity to attend the Trails Advisory Commission meeting last week. It was the first one that they've had since I was appointed to the commission. They've struggled with maintaining a quorum as well. Unfortunately, they were at that meeting discussing their legislative priorities. And so I did let them know that really they need to move that earlier in the year if it's something that they want to bring to the mayor and to the assembly. So they're going to work on, they've also identified December, January, February are tough months to get a quorum. So they're going to look at pushing that up. And I think it's also timely given the invocation because people are certainly out on our trails a lot more. I would also like to take this moment real quick to remind people that when they're walking their dogs, they should have them properly leashed. I've had some challenges on our city bike paths this week, walking my own dogs and people not paying attention to that, or people driving their snow machines on our bike paths. But so it's, it was very timely, at least in terms of the things that they were discussing as we move into the budget season. And they were glad to see a member from the assembly there. They said it had been a while since someone had been. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where that committee goes, or that commission goes as well.
Thank you. Mr. Quist, welcome. Do you have any reports from your mini committee?
The Sustainability Commission met last Wednesday, welcomed their newest commissioner, John Davies, and the bulk of the agenda consisted of working on the informational flyer that they'll be using as a kind of starting point for the conversation, actually what sounds like will be the various conversations that will be happening at the town halls that they're planning. They also sent tentative agendas for those town halls and their meetings. They'll looks like they'll be beginning in April with the first town hall. So that will be like the second Wednesday of the month at 6 o'clock. It'll be at CCHRC. And then alternating months after that, they'll have a regular meeting in May, and then try to have another town hall in June. That way, including the one in North Pole, they'll get 6 of those done before they kind of regroup to have a report for us in the new year. As Mr. Prox mentioned, the Air Pollution Control Commission met on Tuesday. I did not attend for a couple of reasons. One was my birthday, and secondly, they were meeting in their quasi-judicial capacity, and I just wasn't very comfortable attending because of that. I don't know if that's a reasonable decision, but I felt that it was. Anyways, so the only other thing I'd like to mention about commissions at the moment, and everybody here is aware, but maybe for people listening in the audience or online, there are many vacancies, and we're looking for commissioners. And maybe the mayor will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think anybody interested who feels qualified or just wants to learn more can contact Krista Major in the mayor's office. And there's lots of ways you can participate. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tacky, do you have any reports on boards and commissions? Or...
No, I have nothing to report at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Wojcicki?
No report.
Mr. Lawrence?
Regarding what Mr. Quist just said about vacancies on the boards and commissions, an email did come out pretty recently with at least half a dozen boards and commissions that are, need new participants. FMAT's policy board met yesterday, and it was a relatively thin meeting, but we did take steps to continue the process of transforming this metropolitan planning organization to a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Any report from the charrette Tuesday?
Well, the mayor and I were there. The mayor was there more of it than I was, and I think it was pretty interesting. And I think useful information was derived, but I think the mayor may have more to say.
Any takeaways? Maybe say to let everybody know what the charrette was about?
So we took a look at comments from previous charrettes and looking at maps of a variety of different transportation components for the community, bicycles, and what issues are presented or need to be corrected or addressed one way or another for bicycles and for pedestrians and for freight traffic. Each of these was a separate map that we were looking at in the community. And then general, just normal vehicular traffic through the community also. And a lot of good points raised. Nobody's really tried to coordinate an effort for some of these things, particularly like bicycles. So we have bike paths to nowhere that don't connect to other bike paths, and it would be nice if we had a system in our community so that you could go from point A to point B. And that common theme, looking at transportation corridors, and it was coming up with ideas for the long-range plan to take us out to 2045, actually, is what this is for. And so it's a little bit of a challenge to try to predict even technology, and are we going to have, those automatic cars in Fairbanks, and what impacts that might be. So we didn't get into the weeds on that sort of thing, but we were trying to guess what the assumption was, that we would have a 25% increase in population by 2045, and that may or may not happen, but that was kind of the supposition being made for creating a plan that might accommodate that. So we weren't really stuck on the number, and a lot of good ideas, good attendance, people knowledgeable in the different issues. I think we had all the different user groups well represented, and a lot of value in it. So Kittelson's going to roll all of this together and come back with a draft that'll get more scrutiny.
I think Mr. Williams was trying to point something out to you.
He's trying to point out the commissions that have vacancies, because you were talking about that. So I could tell you that the Animal Control Commission has a vacancy, Early Childhood Development Commission, the Health and Social Services Commission, Historic Preservation, Land Management, Parks and Recreation, the Platting Board, and the Trails Advisory Commission. Each have vacancies. And so if anyone is interested, stop by the mayor's office or give Krista a call at 459-1300 in the mayor's office and give us fill out a form.
Thank you very much. With that, we as an assembly have nothing more that we can do until 7 o'clock when we start with public hearing. So we're going to recess until then. Okay, we're going to call our March 22, 2018 meeting back to order. It is really loud mic. It is approximately 7 o'clock in the Mona Lisa Drexler Assembly Chambers, and we're going to start with our reports from the City of Fairbanks Representative Rick Cleaver.
Thank you. 2 items of good news, I think, tonight. The last time I was here, I shared with you that we were looking at increasing snow storage facility, and down South Fairbanks, back when I was mayor, we did buy some property that was to the south of what's called Reflections. And at last Monday's meeting, we did authorize the purchase of that property, which will double the size of the snow storage capacity down there. And after you see this winter, if you drive by the curling rink and you see how high the mountain is of snow at that site, which is probably the most critical site we have in the city, you can see that we tend to get spared in the light years and forget how important those snow storage sites are and how precious they can become. So that's good news. Other item, I serve with Mayor Castle and with Assemblymember Lawrence on the FNATS committee. And as most of you know, we put out a TIP, which is essentially a schedule of the programs, the improvement programs we have over the next 3 years. Inevitably, some of those projects gets pushed back. If DOT cannot get to them, and it'll free up money. And so we are constantly reallocating those funds. That was the case in this year for the fiscal year 2018. So to free up a lot of funds, what we call improvements. So you'll be seeing a lot more road improvements because we have a lot of projects that were shovel ready at the city and can take advantage of those funds. A project outside the city would be Yukon Drive up at the university. And that's exciting to us. With nothing coming out of Juneau anymore, this is a great source for us to take advantage of. So we'll be seeing some activity there and putting some folks to work. So that's it.
Super, thank you. Let's see if there are any questions for Mr. Cleworth. Seeing none, I had one for you. So Yukon Drive on the university, are those state roads or municipal roads or?
Yeah, technically, it's a state. It would be a state road.
Because it's a state facility?
But it's a state road as far as I know. It's not maintained. It's maintained by them. I mean, up there, and I think that the university also does some of their own work.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Cleworth? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here and your report. Let's see, that takes us to the City of North Pole Representative, Ms. Welch. Welcome.
Thank you. From the mayor in North Pole, I'm bringing you news that the city is continuing to have some really nice conversations with the developers that are looking into new projects within the city. There are several developers agreements in the works, and it's anticipated to be a very busy summer in North Pole. We also have the contractor that started the water projects related to the contamination out there in our area. They have begun with their laying pipe in the ground, and they're actually finding that the warm weather right now is a little bit of a problematic issue here. But and again, there was -10 this morning, so I guess they are moving along as they are supposed to. The mayor is also working with a young student from the high school who's trying to develop a forum for civil discussions on issues of the community, is what he's calling it. The young student is working with the mayor, hoping that they can have a community meeting regarding the topic of what is an acceptable level of private property regulations. And the forum would be one for anybody who could participate in it, but they would need to sign a pledge of civility in order of participating. So look for more information on that in the future. And the city is also reviewing the source water protection plan for the North Pole utility wells in anticipation for a public comment. And finally, I'd like to add, and this is for the whole borough, we had the judging on the final science fair projects today down in Pioneer Park. Sent 16 of my projects from Hunter today. And I would encourage the public who are available to go down and view this viewing tomorrow, I believe from 2 to 7, and again on Saturday morning, and the awards will be given out there. So lots of beautiful projects down there, not only those from Hunter, but from all the other schools in the area. So definitely go down and take a look if you have a chance.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that report. Any questions for Ms. Hunter? Yes, Ms. Lawrence.
Ms. Welch.
Yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Welch.
She teaches us.
I did that first, I believe.
Is this artwork we're talking about, or
No.
at Pioneer Park, or what?
No, they're science fair projects.
Oh, it was a science fair. I didn't-
So we had science fair in each of the schools, the elementary schools and the middle schools, most of us prior to the vacation that we just had, the spring vacation. And then each school has a certain amount of student projects that they may send to the judging for the district-wide judging. And that's as far as we go here. Some places also go to state, but we found that it was too expensive to create that for here, so. And the nice thing about it, I always encourage my kids to do, is they can actually enter their boards into the fair in the summertime. And they don't have to be there to present it, it's just the board itself. So, and they can win money, is what I always tell them. They always like that, like $3 to $5 or something like that a piece. But, it's another way to, in my mind, it's another way to get younger kids to start looking at how we scientifically determine things. Like they have to do things 3 times. The experiment has to be done 3 times, and it has to be something that you can try to, recreate if somebody else did the same.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Welch? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate your report. And that takes us to Ms. Lambert.
Hi, good evening, everyone. At the March 6th board meeting, the board approved a resolution honoring Traditional Chiefs Week. This week, staff and students throughout the district have been hosting activities and participating in lessons learning about and honoring our traditional chiefs. The district continues its implementation of personalized learning. This week has been Middle School Launch Week, as middle schools hosted various activities for staff, students, and families. Last night actually was the Middle School Launch Day, and I attended the one at Ryan Middle School, and I think it's going to be really interesting. They're ready to go, and very excited about personalized learning at the middle schools. Elementary schools are well underway, and high schools are starting their planning and will be beginning their implementation at the beginning of next school year. Earlier this week, representatives from Education Elements, which is our personalized learning consultant and partners, were in Fairbanks filming classrooms in action across the district, and Fairbanks was selected to be highlighted at their Education Elements upcoming national conference. So we will be there. Their prime focus for personalized learning when they're at their national conference this year, which is great. It shows how much Fairbanks has really adapted and really taken it on as its own. So it's great. Fourth quarter of 2017-18 school year began this last Monday as students return from spring break. April and May are going to be busy months for all of us as they prepare for the end of school and the upcoming graduations, which start on 10 May. So getting pretty close to those. The administration will be hosting, the school board last night, we approved the district's preliminary FY 2018-19 recommended budget. So we're looking forward to our budget presentation to the Finance Committee on April 12th. The board will continue to solicit public input over the next several weeks and will resume their work on the final budget once local and state funding has been determined. And that usually happens sometime in the May timeframe is when we come back together for the budget process. The administration will be hosting a budget community forum next Wednesday at Ryan Middle School. That's the 28th from 5:30 to 7:30. The forum is open to the public, and we will have an opportunity to hear from the administration and board and provide input at that time also. And then anybody who wants to testify can always come to one of our meetings and testify during our public testimony section if you have any, for whatever reason, but especially for the budget. And state and local education funding remains at the forefront for the board as board members continue their lobbying and advocacy for Juneau with our Juneau legislatures. The board and district administration encourage community members to reach out to the legislatures regarding education funding. So again, this will be going into the fourth year when we have static funding from the legislature. So although we do have flat funding, we do have expenses that go up every year. So flat funding is not flat funding, it's actually deficit funding. The board's next regular meeting is Tuesday, April 3rd at 7 p.m. And we do have a work session on April 2nd, which is that Monday, on a proposed new charter school, the Discovery Peaks Charter School, which they propose to locate up at North Pole. Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Lambert? Mr. Lawrence.
Ms. Lambert, given looking at the preliminary budget at this point that's passed, what amount of fund balance is there in that budget?
That we have proposed to use at this point in time. The preliminary amount of fund balance proposed that came from the Citizen Budget Committee is $2.8 million.
That's how much is being used?
That's the proposed to be used in this
budget. How much would that leave?
So what they did is they assumed a flat funding for that the reserve would remain flat, and so they decided that the Citizen Budget Review, which has been accepted by the administration right now, was to fund it over a course of 4 years. So $2.8 million over a course of 4 years would use up the entire reserve.
All right, so you're leaving $7 or $8 million as a fund.
Right, assuming that we will be flat funded next year again through the state legislature so that we can have that as so that we can use portion of that for our budget without depleting the entire reserve.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Lambert? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate the in-depth report and hard work. So that takes us to special orders at public hearing, and we'll begin with ordinance number 2017-20-1V, which is an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2017-18 budget by appropriating $3,750 in federal pass-through grant funding to the Special Revenue Fund for 3 Alaska State Library continuing education grants. The sponsor is Mayor Castle. It's on page 29 of your packet. Mayor Castle, do you have a staff report?
We do. We'll go to Georgina Olson from the library for that report. Georgina?
This is an additional trio of grants from the State Library for continuing education for library staff. It's federally funded, and it's a pass-through grant to the State Library. And, of course, since it's continuing education and it extends our continuing education budget, we really hope that it will meet everyone's approval.
And that concludes your staff report?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. So that takes us to public hearing. And so I'm going to open public hearing on ordinance 2017-20-1V, which is appropriating $3,750 in federal pass-through grants for 3 state library continuing education grants. I don't have anyone signed up to speak on this. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, I'm going to close public hearing.
Move to adopt.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Mr. Tackey. Discussion, questions, debate. Seeing none, clerk, I think I want the listening public and our citizens in the room to know that last week we've been briefed on all of these things that we're thinking about and considering tonight. So it isn't that we just go, oh, whatever. We really have thought about it and had an in-depth briefing by Ms. Lawson. Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll. Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Lodowski?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Ms. Major? Yes. Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge? Yes. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none? 6-0. It's approved 6-0. And that takes us to ordinance number 2018-10. And this is an ordinance amending FNSB code 3.16.040 regarding rules for public testimony. The sponsor is Assemblymember Lajewski, and it is on page 36 of our packet. And we'll start with a staff report from Mr. Lajewski.
So I'll mention that, and stop me if you think I'm going too far close to debate, and just
Just give us the facts.
Okay, well, I was going to first mention, and I think this is in line, just that I listened to the recording of the work session after I unfortunately had to leave, I think, minutes before we discussed this. And I wanted to thank Mr. Quist for a good faith effort, I guess, a quasi-staff report. I don't know if that's how you might address it, but, and I don't think anything he said was wrong, but I'll give you kind of why it's here, and it's just coming up because a few different people in the borough said that some of them actually went as far as to say that they have not testified at borough meetings because, at borough assembly meetings because right now we're on the live radio, and they were concerned that there could be safety issues with their address going out on the radio. And even since that point, new issues have come up that I had not even thought of when I put this forward, but specifically the ones that kind of got my attention where a couple of people mentioned it seemed to be a safety issue, and typically women who are concerned that there could be some sort of crime of passion because someone on the radio likes their voice, follows them home, meets them at their home afterwards and does some sort of crime, or perhaps in a crowded meeting, we don't have a crowded one here today, someone likes the way someone looks and follows them home, that sort of thing. And so that's the inspiration for the ordinance.
And thank you. So that concludes your staff report. Thank you very much. So we're going to go to public hearing now, and I have 3 people signed up, and was a really lame opening of public comment, wasn't it? There, we'll open public comment. So this is on ordinance 2018-10, and this is the ordinance amending the Fairbanks North Borough codes regarding public testimony. I have 3 people signed up, and once those 3 people have spoken, anyone else that wishes to speak certainly can come forward. We'll start with Mr. Prax, and then Christine Robbins is second. And Ms. Robbins, if you'd like to take the empty seat, that'd be great. And in reviewing our ordinance last week in our work session, it came to our attention that it says we shall also require the spelling of the last name as well as the address until we consider this evening. So, Mr. Prax, if you would please give us your name and address and spell your last name for us, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Prox, last name spelled P as in P. Ptarmigan, R-A-X. Address is 1015 Meadowbrook. And I hadn't actually given this whole thing much thought, but when Aaron brought it up, I did give it, and I actually have some personal experience in this. I had a very short one-evening career in the security business when the Prospector caught fire a couple years ago. I was assigned to be the security guard, and I didn't think much of it. But in fact, as long as I was doing that, I was going to be a janitor and start cleaning up the mess. And my son and I went home, and I was worried about cleaning up the mess, and he thought, well, if we're security guards, I suppose we ought to bring a firearm with us. I said, yeah, whatever. Well, sure enough, 3 people came down and wanted to burglarize the place, and we just happened to be there, and it all turned out fine, and there was a lot of humor in it. But the point being is that they heard on the news that there was a fire at the Prospector, and they made a deliberate decision to come down there that night thinking that it wouldn't be secure, and they could do just exactly what they wanted to do. How about that? And so I think it is a real valid issue that is brought up, and we do need to be a little bit more careful in general, not just in this meeting, but wherever. There are essentially career criminals. There's a lot of them in Fairbanks, and they do. I don't know that there's an organized crime network, but there are a lot of people that, because of whatever, about the only way they can make a living is being a criminal. And so this would make it a little bit more difficult for them to pursue that career. And so I think it's a very good thing. And then I just wanted to point out that there is probably a little grammatical error that Sister Gisela would like me to point out. It says name and if they live inside or outside of the borough, and I think that should be changed to whether they live inside or outside of the borough to be grammatically correct. No big deal.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions for you, Mr. You get it right. Is it? I say Prox and you say Prax, or is it the other way around?
The other way around.
That's why I'm confused. Mr. Prax.
Prox. No.
Okay, Mr. Prox. See if there's any questions for you. Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down. And Mr. Tuck, if you'd like to take the empty seat. Ms. Robbins, your name and address, and please spell your last name for us for the record.
Kristen Robbins, Robbins, 1340 Arctic Turn Drive, 99712.
Thank you.
I just want to come out in support of this ordinance and hope, just in the general interest of public safety, that you would pass it. But also I wanted to point out that our address is already written down for the borough if it's just an issue for the borough. So it's not like you could refrain from keeping anybody from, you would need to withhold, that information from you guys. So because it's already there, and then but just from the general public that they don't need to know. So anyway, just my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if there are questions for you. See again, thank you very much. And if anyone else wishes to speak on this, there's an empty seat. Please come forward. Mr. Tuck, your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Sam Tuck, T-U-C-K, 3280 Kingery Court. I come here as a concerned citizen and a retired police officer. When I first heard about this amendment, when I first heard about what was going on and the amendment being discussed, I didn't really give it a lot of attention. And the more I started thinking about it, I reflected back on some cases that I'd worked. And honestly, I should have been a little bit more on the ball, I guess, because I was concerned with information being given out real time. I think it's a great safety issue, really. If you must collect the addresses, I don't see a problem with that, but I do not think it should be broadcast. I just grave concerns about that. And that's really all I have to say. I hope you'll support the amendment.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions for you, Mr. Tuck. So I've seen some commissions that have a sign-in sheet where people give their address, and that would be a way to provide the address without broadcasting it.
I believe that would be fine. We need to be very careful about our personal information. I mean, I know you hear it all the time, but even the sign-in sheet, I would rather see, I mean, I'm maybe a little extreme, but I'd rather see almost a ballot box type sign-in because, let's be honest, there's some unsavory people out in the world. And tonight we would notice it, but, if we had a large crowd here, somebody could be standing around and read off the list. I actually cringed, I don't know, a couple of months ago when I heard a young lady give testimony, and she gave her address, gave her name, and then proceeded to say that she was a young single mother that lived at home alone with just the children. And I'm like, too much information had been given out at that point, because now you've put where she lives at. Just not a good deal. So, but I think you should be able to verify that, someone lives in the borough. Absolutely. I just think we need to be very cognizant of information remaining with the borough and not being broadcast publicly.
Thank you. Let's see if anybody else has any questions for you. Seeing none, we appreciate you coming down. Anyone else that wishes to speak? We have an empty seat if you'd like to come forward. Mr. Dowdy, your name and address, and please spell your last name for us. Thank you.
Asa Dowdy, D-O-W-D-Y, 1051 Eastwood Lane, Fairbanks, Alaska, 99712. From experience, I would say that you don't need to know where we live. Whether you live on down toward Delta at the furthest point, or whether you live toward Atlanta at the furthest point. We're all under the same rules. Now, one time I was called out by an assembly person because I lived about 15 miles from what they were talking about. What they were talking about was, he was doing a business where it was wrong from what he put into the borough for, and they didn't like it. Well, that could apply to me no matter where I lived at in the borough. And yet I was asked when I was talking about it that night because I didn't live in the area. And another time, I organized a group, invited everybody with signs along the road out of Chino Hot Springs Road when Chino Hot Springs Road gas was when the liquor license. And I asked them to come in and testify, give my phone number, and they called me. I told them I didn't care whether you're for it or against it. Come in and testify. That's your privilege. A couple of days before the testimony, I got on TV. The guy wanted to interview me. And the next day I was called in the borough and told they had to put off the voting for 2 weeks because they advertised it wrong. I was kind of naive. It was put off because they wanted the owner of Chino Hot Springs Gas to organize his employees to come down and testify. They did. And they didn't live along Chino Hot Springs Road. But still, to me, they lived in the borough, so they could testify, just as my neighbors could. So, essentially, I don't even think you, as assembly members, need to know where we live as we're testifying, because it could influence whether you thought we had any interest in it or not. So I think this definitely needs to be passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dowdy. Let's see if there are questions for you. I don't see any. Thank you for coming down. We appreciate it. Does anyone else wish to speak on Ordinance 2018-10? Seeing no one coming forward, we're going to close public hearing.
Move to adopt. Second.
So it was moved by Mr. Tuckey and seconded by Mr. Lawrence. Is that correct? And that takes us to assembly debate and questions of staff or sponsor. Mr. Lawrence.
I'd like to move to amend the ordinance. On 934, I would delete what was proposed to be added, which is the words, if they live inside or outside of the borough, and replace that with the following. His or her city, community, neighborhood, or subdivision of residence.
Okay.
Period.
So Mr. Lawrence has moved to amend the ordinance to delete the proposed amendment and replace it with his or her city, community, neighborhood, or subdivision of residence. Is there a second? Second. So it's been moved by Mr. Lawrence and seconded by Ms. Major. Mr. Lawrence, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yes. I agree that this assembly does not need to know the exact address of the residents of people who come forward to testify, and there's very good reasons not to have that address stated over the radio. But I got to disagree with Mr. Dowdy. I think there's a lot of times when my evaluating what's being said is going to be impacted, at least in part, by where that particular person lives and whether they're in the air quality, the air quality zone or not, or whether they're, anywhere near the liquor establishment that wishes to have its license renewed. Therefore, I think this amendment will allow us to have an idea of where these people, where the testifiers live, without knowing specifically where they live. And so I think their privacy is protected, and security is protected, but we get some relevant information as to at least what area or neighborhood they live in.
Okay, on the amendment, anyone wish to speak? Yes, Ms. Major.
So I agree with Mr. Lawrence. Having that information, even as people come forward for marijuana licenses, being able to know whether or not that person is kind of in the neighborhood, so to speak. I mean, for me, obviously anyone who testifies on any issue, it's important, but I definitely pay attention when the impact is immediate to I don't want to say that I pay attention to everyone, but there's just that added element of knowing, that level of interest. And so I appreciate when I have that information, and I agree, I don't need to know a person's address, right? That it doesn't seem as relevant as at least knowing the general area where they are living, given the topic of discussion.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Wojcicki and then Mr. Tacky.
So I'm trying to get part of the intent. I mean, what I'm kind of hearing on the surface is this is just, to me, it sounds like a sort of different way of stating the intent behind what was in the original language, which I'm fine with. But let's say, just use myself as an example. If I was testifying, and I don't know that I can as an assembly member, but let's suppose I wasn't an assembly member, right? And this is a couple years down the road. I live outside of the city of Fairbanks. So I couldn't give you a city of residence. But I live, my mail address also says Fairbanks. So I'm trying to work out if I could just say Fairbanks because I live pretty close to the border, or if I could just say, hey, I live in the borough, or at what point would this be kind of like a violation of our testifying rules?
Well, from my perspective, I acknowledge that certainly the city limits of Fairbanks makes no sense at all. From my perspective, it includes a little over half the urban area of the borough, and it excludes the other half. If you're just outside of the city, then I wouldn't consider that outside of the city limits. I wouldn't consider that to be your residence. I would ask for whether you've got a neighborhood or a community. I mean, where do you live? I mean, do you have an example? I mean, you don't have to give me the street address, but what street are you on? I mean, I don't need the number, but
yes, Mr. Wojcicki.
So in my case, if you're asking for more specific, which I think would fully satisfy the requirement, I'd say I live off of Geist.
That would be, that would be fine. I mean, I guess that means you're outside of the city, but
not far. But in common speak, I could just say, hey, I live in Fairbanks. Yeah. We'd all know what that meant.
I almost added the word area, but yeah, I mean, that would be fine. I mean, to me, that's telling me in general where you live and what your neighborhood is.
That's your intent.
And that's my intent.
Mr. Tacky.
My question and comments were kind of along the same lines about the listing of city or neighborhood, etc. Like if you lived in the city of North Pole or you lived in the city of Fairbanks, what if you just eliminated the city portion and just put just neighborhood, or if there was a different wording that the attorney might have that's a better way to articulate a region? Because if I just say, I live in the city of Fairbanks, well, that could be you live, right across the street from Fred Meyer West, or it could mean you live in Shannon Park. It was like completely opposite sides. So I think a little more narrowed point would be better. I'm trying to think of what would be good terms.
I think that may have been directed to me. So one consideration, I guess, is that you may have people outside the community, so their neighborhood or subdivision might not be meaningful. But the clerk's office did do a review of other codes. Just saying name and community is what some do. Others say, name and place of residence. So I guess to the extent that you want it to be more specific and you want it to be a general neighborhood, I would use the term neighborhood. That's like what the court system does during voir dire, for instance. When you go through and you give your name, your occupation, what they ask for is your general neighborhood. So they would say, the Farmers Loop area, or, I live in Fox, or whatever general, place you identify, your region of the community that you identify with.
Well, I would be open to deleting the reference to the city. I mean, other than the city of Fairbanks, the city of North Pole is tiny, and so I'm open to deleting the city and community and subdivision if the word neighborhood applies. Maybe that would be easier to for people to understand.
Mr. Wojcicki.
So what I'm thinking is either restart with a new amendment, or we can amend this amendment. I guess what I'm thinking rationally, what I'd like to see happen is keep the default. And I guess we'd amend it to say whether they live inside or outside the borough, because that was my bad English when I got in there in the first place. But and then along your lines, Mr. Lawrence, I think what might satisfy what you're looking for is if we give the presiding officer the authority to require neighborhood for certain issues, right? So the presiding officer could decide for a specific issue, no, for that, because we're testifying on a marijuana shop on a specific street, we kind of want to know if you live in the neighborhood or not, or whatever it is.
Mr. Lawrence.
Well, this ordinance in the code is just dealing with the initial, what is initially supposed to be stated by the citizen when they come before us to testify. Obviously, the presiding officer and all of us have the ability to ask in more detail on where they live or work if it's relevant to the issue. I don't think we should have to try to guess or have the presiding officer guess. Well, is there anybody on this assembly who would think neighborhood of residence is relevant for that assembly member's thought process? So I think this needs to be automatic. That I think this amendment or something like it needs to be in there so that it's always asked at the beginning, what their residential neighborhood is. I think that's useful information pretty much in all cases. And so I don't mind narrowing down, what Ms. Bowen said, and just maybe referring to, asking for the neighborhood of residents only. But I think that should be asked in all circumstances.
Ms. Major. I just want really just to agree with Mr. Lawrence again that I do think it's important to put this on the table and not have it fall on the presiding officer every time. I think there's goodness in having consistency in our testimony. So I would like to propose an amendment to the amendment that then simply says, and the neighborhood in which they reside or their neighborhood of residence, whichever is most acceptable in this.
I second their
So we need some specific language first. Yep. Are you, Ms. Bowen, are you working with her to develop some specific language?
So my suggestion would be that you say his or her neighborhood or place of residence. So if someone lives out of the area, they just can tell you Anchorage, Alaska, or something like that instead of a specific neighborhood.
Does that work for you, Ms. Major?
So his or her neighborhood or place of residence.
Does that work for you? Seconded by Mr. Tackey. I'm sorry, Mr. Wojcicki? Okay, thank you. So it's been moved by Ms. Major and seconded by Mr. Tackey that, thank you, Ms. Wojcicki. It's a funny brain tonight. Mr. Wojcicki, that we change line 34 to read spelling the last name and neighborhood or place of residence. Discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Yes, Mr. Wojcicki.
So my intent.
Mr. Quist, I'm sorry. Did you have something on the amendment?
I was going to make the amendment, the motion that Angela just made.
Thank you, Mr. Wojcicki.
So my intent here would be going forward, if someone lives out at 15-mile Elliott Highway, they could come and just say, hey, I live on the Elliott Highway beyond Fox. And so they wouldn't have to get that sort of detail.
Thank you. Any other comments on the amendment to the amendment? Also, of course, in establishing the record as Mr. Wojcicki is doing. Mr. Tackey.
Can you read the exact link?
I can read the exact thing. Would you like me to read line 34 or just the exact?
Exactly, 34.
Okay, line 34 would read spelling the last name and his or her neighborhood or place of residence. Is that correct? Thank you. Anything else on the amendment to the amendment? We're ready to vote on the amendment to the amendment. I won't carry the main motion, but it does carry the amendment to the amendment. Mr. Wojcicki?
Yes.
Ms. Major? Yes. Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge? Yes. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none? 6-0. The amendment is amended, which takes us back to the amendment as amended. Discussion on that. We just discussed that. I think, is there any other discussion? Essentially, we have an amended ordinance in front of us. And I think if there's no discussion, we're ready to vote on it. Doesn't vote on the, yes, Mr. Quist?
Sorry, did you just rule that did not carry
The main motion. But you're right, so we can,
I misunderstood, I think.
do we still need to vote on the amendment? Yes, okay. Thank you. So we need to vote on the amendment. Any discussion before we vote? Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll on the amendment as amended.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki?
Yes.
Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Ms. Major? Yes. Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge?
Yes. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none?
6-0.
Okay, the ordinance is amended. Yes, Mr. Quist.
Thank you.
On the ordinance as amended.
I think generally supportive of this ordinance. I think that it does address what's potentially a real problem sometimes. My particular concern, I'd like to thank the sponsor for bringing forward. My particular concern, I think it's been mentioned this evening, people, is the fact that we're live on the air. And so it just makes it that much easier for somebody with ill intent maybe to take advantage of the situation. That being said, and I do encourage everybody to vote for this ordinance, I just want to point out that there are some drawbacks to not collecting this information. And I guess I might have a question as well, because I don't think that this is going to be addressed in the code, but regarding the sign-in sheet. But so I guess there's value to this information. One thing in particular is when my understanding is when the clerks are preparing the minutes, sometimes they need to rely on that address information in order to be able to identify the person at all, because the way they've signed in or the way they were speaking on the record, especially since we haven't been having people spell their name consistently for a long time, sometimes they'll use that information to actually decipher who the testifier is. And I think that there is value to that. It doesn't seem like it's worth the potential risk of broadcasting that information live, though. So we have a sign-in sheet. I don't think that this ordinance addresses that in any way, so presumably we would still have a sign-in sheet, and people could provide their address at that point. If that's still the case, I would encourage people, to do that, if for no other reason other than it helps the clerks. So I think that this privacy concern is legitimate, and that's why I'm supporting this. But I would like to talk about something that I think is also one of the reasons that this is brought forward, which I think or that I should speak for the sponsor, but things I've heard from testifiers, and it comes from like a fear of government, that people feel if they provide their information that they're going to be subject to retaliation. I think this is particularly true in the air quality arena. People feel if they give information that they're going to become a target of the air quality division. I certainly hope that's not true, and it's just kind of alarming to me that we have people that are scared of the borough in our community. Anyways, and the other kind of thing that I'd just like to point out is that
your information, like if somebody's really motivated or cares more than like nothing, they can find out where you live. And I mean, I guess like all of us that are here every Thursday, like the administration, I mean, we must be really courageous to be, not at our addresses at the moment. But I guess it's a little sarcastic. But I'll support this, and I would encourage everybody to do it. But I'm just really kind of, I really wish that we could be more cooperative between people that want to testify and the government. And you don't need to hide from us. So. Since this doesn't seem to address the sign-in sheet at all, which I think, or maybe, yeah.
I just want to clarify that it is separately in code that the clerk provides sign-up sheets, but it doesn't specify what has to be provided other than someone signs up. So my assumption would be the clerk's office will modify their sign-up sheets in accordance with whatever your requirement here is.
And that's what we would do.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, so if I may continue, so I still support this ordinance. I might think of something in the future because I don't really think that I don't have an amendment at hand. But I mean, the fact that there would be a sign-in sheet where people can still provide that information in a voluntary way that's like not on the air. That I think that if that sign-in sheet came forward and it didn't have their address on it, we would still hear them. Or maybe I think that the real problem that's being solved by this ordinance is this live broadcast of private, somewhat private information. The sign-in sheet in no way causes that problem, but still provides value to the public process. So, I'm not thinking of an amendment that would allow the clerks to still keep that on the form. But in any case, I would support the ordinance. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wojcicki.
Sure, I agree with much of what Mr. Quist brought up, and I definitely agree with the point that the live broadcast on the radio is the primary issue. There is a secondary issue. I think it's less important, but the actual sign-up sheets. And so I did have conversations with the clerk's office before this, and so my intent was that they would and they seem to generally be on the same page, but I think it's good for us to talk about it in front of them so we can kind of maybe give a little guidance on what we want to see in that sign-up sheet. And I don't know that we need an actual ordinance to do that, but the intent was kind of that it's designed so that the default encouraged format is that you still put your address, but then there would be an option to basically opt out. And so that's actually what I'd like to see most people do when they testify is if they don't have a privacy concern, I think that you should still voluntarily just say, hey, this is where I live like we have been in the past, but not be required to. And so myself, if I come to testify when I'm no longer assembly member, I plan on giving my address to the assembly. But to the topic of retaliation, I would say this to you, and I think there are some folks who are concerned that if they have a critical comment about air quality regulations, that they will get a sniffer truck or something parked next to them the next morning. And I hope that's not true. I don't think it is. I think that the folks who work for the borough, exude a high degree of professionalism, and they're not going to risk their job over some petty retaliation. That's kind of my thought, and that's my impression of the folks who are working there. But if someone has that fear, and this alleviates that, and we get to hear from them, that's a good thing, right? We just get to hear more public comment. And so, anyway, I guess that's my comment to the extent of that, and yeah, that's all for now.
Mr. Lawrence, do you?
No, I was just going to suggest, and it's already there, that the people who wish to testify print their names, and that's what's requested at this point. Because I know the biggest problem that I've had when I'm acting as a presiding officer and the clerks have had is not being able to read the writing. But tonight, 4 people who've signed in are very good printers, and we should encourage people to print legibly, and this does. So I don't have anything to add to that. I think it's a good sign-in sheet in its current format.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I certainly support this. I think it's an improvement. And I agree with Mr. Quist. I've heard that some folks are intimidated coming here. I find that discouraging. I also find it discouraging that some folks think that we would retaliate against them for saying something negative about what we're doing. Trust me, I get negative comments every single day on what we're doing in one capacity or another. I am not aware of anyone on our staff ever retaliating against anybody for comments that they've made one way or another. And certainly during the rest of my term here, I would absolutely not condone that in any way, shape, or form. And there would be discipline if I found that anybody was doing something like that. We have diversity of opinions in the community, and that's great. It's part of what makes living here pretty cool. And I value all the comments that come forward here, and we do our best to try to be user-friendly here. I know sometimes it doesn't seem that way when government has regulations and you're enforcing regulations, but we try to do it as pleasantly as we can, and we talk about it with the staff. And actually, we get quite a few letters complimenting us on how we treat the folks that come in here to not only testify, but do work here at the borough. So if anybody has any complaints about the way they're treated by any of the staff here, I encourage them to pass it along either to the director of the department or to the mayor's office, and we will investigate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions or comments or discussion? Are we ready to vote on the ordinance as amended? It looks to me like we are. Clerk, please call the roll. Mr. Tackey?
Yes.
Ms. Major?
Yes.
Mr. Quist?
Yes.
Mr. Wojcicki?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Ms. Dodge? Yes. Would anyone like to change the vote? Seeing none? 6-0. It's adopted 6-0. And that takes us to consideration of calendar unfinished business, of which we have none. And that takes us to another citizens' comments. And this is citizens' comment continued. This is for items that are not scheduled for public hearing, a continuation. So anything that's on the agenda not scheduled for public hearing, I'll open citizens' comments. If anyone wishes to speak on items on the agenda not scheduled, seeing no one coming forward, we'll close those citizens' comments. And that takes us through consideration calendar new businesses ordinances to be referred. There are none. We wouldn't be there. And we have another citizens' comments, and this one is on items other than those appearing on the agenda. So I'll open those citizens' comments and see if anyone wishes to speak on an item not on the agenda, and I have a taker. Please give us your name and address. I think we've just adopted that. We haven't signed it yet. So at this time, I'll ask you for your name and address, and please spell your last name for us. Thank you.
Paul Lamberts, Lamberts, 212 Rhubarb Drive, Fairbanks, Alaska.
Thank you.
So it kind of seems like the theme tonight is getting the public more interested in taking part in local government. So I was here 2 weeks ago, and there were me and another person sitting in the back. And, it's funny when there's only two people there, everybody zones in on them, like, are you going to speak? Why are you here? But unless there's something very controversial going on, it's usually pretty empty here. So I was wondering if you knew how many people tune in on the radio, and even how many download the audio afterwards or the minutes. And if you had any plans in the future of trying to up public participation in this. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, so our citizens' comments are framed in a way so that we listen to the comments and we ask questions back. So let's see if we have some questions that we can ask you back that are related. Yes, Mr. Quist.
Thank you for your testimony. Do you have any suggestions as to how we could encourage more public involvement?
Well, I'm always spreading stuff over Facebook when a meeting's going on, both city and borough. I'm at all of them. I try to get people fired up to come out. It doesn't work very much. I put a poll on Facebook this morning in a Fairbanks site, and, I was just wondering, how many people attended or listened on the radio or, whatever. One of the options I put in was, I don't care. That one was the top option. So that just kind of brought this up as maybe a little bit of a social problem here.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Lawrence, then Ms. Major.
Mr. Lamberts, first of all, I was hoping, if anybody in this room knows how many people are listening to these broadcasts, it would be Mr. Quist, if he's got any idea. But since he asked the question I was going to ask, whether you had any suggestions, I guess my sole question would be, how does it feel to be the last one to give your address?
See, I was trying to figure out how I did it otherwise, so I didn't screw it up and be the first one to screw it up. So
we all had to think it through. Okay.
I did.
Ms. Major.
So I have a comment, not a question, and the comment is that I actually really appreciate when you and your guys, you and your mom are here. It's always great to see you here. I really appreciate any time that someone comes and participates in this process, and your dedication to being here, I think, is just incredible.
It's a little bit of an addiction,
We do know. So let me ask the mayor. We can ask technical questions, and I think in ways you've asked a technical question about the number of downloads and minutes and tune-ins. Mr. Mayor, do you have that information, or did you have a different comment?
We don't have analytics on the website to say exactly how many people are downloading the minutes, so we don't have a concrete answer for you. I can tell you it's popular. I can also tell you from my trips to Fred Meyer's that I heard you on the radio say this, so I know there's a lot of people listening out there, and I was surprised with the number of folks that are listening in on the radio. So we just don't have the analytics to come up with numbers on any of that. I'm sorry.
That's what I was afraid of, but, I would still ask.
And I would say that's my experience also. I had a lot of people. I'm surprised also at the number of people that will say, I was listening to you talking about this last night, or something of that nature. So I think a lot, but it is very invisible. You're right.
Well, that gives me some hope then, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Lamberts? Seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we're going to close those public comments. And that takes us to Assembly member comments. Mayor, would you like another bite of the apple before we...
I think I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, let's see. I started with Ms. Major last time, so we'll start with Mr. Turkey.
I have no comment this evening, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lejeski.
Look up over the next couple of nights. I think you have a good chance of seeing some dancing in the sky.
Nice, thank you. Sounds like a poem. Mr. Lawrence.
I appreciate the people who came down tonight, and they gave us some valuable comments, and that's what we need to hear.
Thank you. Ms. Major.
No further comments. Thank you.
Mr. Quist.
Thank you. I'd like to maybe try to answer Mr. Lambert's question, kind of, and not give a real answer about how many people might be listening on the radio. So KUAC, I have some maybe more knowledge in the general public because I'm employed there. KUAC hasn't had money to purchase a ratings book probably about 10 years. And in the radio industry, since you're broadcasting, it's one way. Like, you have no idea how many people are listening unless you hire somebody to have done this study. As far as webcast analytics go, that's something that might be accessible. So I can try to get an idea of how many people are tuned in at least through the KUAC website during that time, and if I learn anything meaningful, I could report it here. But that wouldn't be inclusive of other ways that you can listen. On the borough website, that's something the borough would have to do, or
this stuff goes through like other streaming services. For example, there's like an NPR app that if you're listening through there, it might be counted differently, and I could look into that. I'd like to maybe comment on Mr. Lambert's suggestion that we have a social problem here, and I would agree. It's not just engagement on like a weekly basis, but when it comes time for elections, quite often there just aren't that many people interested in voting, let alone running for public office. And I would encourage everybody to consider it, or if they can think of somebody who might be interested, recommend it to them. And and to all of us here, as we get like tired of doing this job ourselves, to try to cultivate others that might be interested in taking our place. So that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mayor, I'm just going to give you a heads up. Maybe you'd read that list of open boards and commissions after. I'll give you a second to get it while I read our assembly schedule for the next week, which is very simple. There are no assembly meetings scheduled for next week. We get to go out and enjoy the sunshine. However, the next week we make up for it. We'll have 2 meetings. On April 3rd, there's going to be an assembly special work session. And that's all the information I have. But I believe that's in the assembly chambers, 5:30, April 3rd. It is on a meeting with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation and various city councils, city mayors, and the Air Pollution Commission. And then Thursday, April 5th, we will have a Finance Committee meeting at 5:30 in the Assembly Chambers with the Committee of the Whole work session immediately following. Mr. Mayor, do you have the commissions up?
Absolutely. It's right on our webpage, on the homepage, as a matter of fact, top left part under current events. We've also been pushing it out on Facebook to try to let folks know. So if they don't remember what I say now, they can just go to our website and check it out. So it's the Animal Control Commission, Early Childhood Development, Health and Social Services, Historic Preservation, Land Management, Parks and Recreation, Plating Board, and the Trails Advisory Commission.
Thank you very much. And they contact Ms. Major at 4591300.
Yes, anybody that's interested, we have forms in the mayor's office they can fill out to apply for any of those commission seats.
Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order? With that, we're adjourned.